Imagine a time, long, long ago, when the world was explained with stories. Why does lightning flash across the sky? Well, Zeus is having a bit of a tantrum. Why do the seasons change? Because Persephone has to pop down to the underworld for a few months. These were perfectly good explanations, full of drama and gods with very human-like foibles. But then something rather extraordinary happened in ancient Greece, particularly in a bustling port town called Miletus. A new breed of thinker emerged, men who looked at the world and, instead of asking who was responsible, started to ask what it was all about. These chaps, whom we now call the Pre-Socratics, were the pioneers of Western philosophy and, you could argue, science itself. They were the very first to suggest that the universe wasn't just a chaotic playground for the gods, but a knowable, ordered system, a cosmos that could be understood through logic and observation. These thinkers lived, as their name quite neatly suggests, before the famous gadfly of Athens, Socrates. They weren't a formal club, mind you. They didn't have membership cards or a secret handshake. They were a scattered collection of brilliant minds, living across the Greek world from Ionia in modern-day Turkey to the southern tip of Italy. What united them was a shared curiosity, a radical desire to find a single underlying principle for everything. They were hunting for the arch, the fundamental substance or origin from which everything else sprang. This was a seismic shift in human thought. It was the moment we stepped away from simply accepting myth and started demanding reasons, moving from storytelling to systematic inquiry. It was, in essence, the birth of thinking about thinking. The questions they dared to ask were monumental, the kind that still keep us up at night. What is the world really made of? Is it all just one thing masquerading as many things? Does anything ever truly change, or is it all an illusion? Can we trust what our senses tell us, or is there a deeper, hidden reality that we can only grasp with our minds? These weren't just idle ponderings, they were the foundational questions that would echo through the halls of philosophy for millennia. They were trying to build a complete picture of reality from the ground up, using nothing but their own powers of reason. It was an audacious project, and though their answers might seem a little quaint to us now, the sheer bravery of asking the questions is what makes them so eternally important. Their legacy is not so much in the specific answers they provided. After all, we don't really think everything is made of water anymore. Rather, their true contribution was in establishing the very method of rational inquiry. They laid the groundwork for Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, who would go on to build the grand edifices of Western thought upon the foundations these early pioneers had laid. The Pre-Socratics handed humanity a new toolkit, one filled with logic, reason, and critical analysis. They taught us that the world was not just something to be feared or worshipped, but something to be understood. And that, quite frankly, changed everything. Let's begin in Miletus with a fellow named Thales. He is often called the very first philosopher, and his big idea was wonderfully simple. Everything, he proposed, is ultimately made of water. At first, this might sound a bit silly. Is a rock made of water? Is a flame made of water? But think about it for a moment from his perspective. Water is essential for all life. It falls from the sky as rain, it bubbles up from the earth in springs, and it can exist in three different states: solid ice, liquid water, and gaseous steam. He saw that water was transformative and ubiquitous, and so he made a bold, rational leap. Perhaps it was the single fundamental stuff of the cosmos. It was a brilliant first attempt at a unified theory of everything, not based on a god's whim, but on observation. Hot on his heels was his student, Anaximander, who thought Thales was on the right track but hadn't gone far enough. If everything is water, he wondered, how do you explain its opposite, fire? How can one fundamental substance create its own nemesis? Anaximander's solution was to propose something even more abstract. The arch, he argued, wasn't any one thing we could see or touch, like water or fire. Instead, it was something he called the aparon, a Greek word meaning the boundless or the indefinite. This aparon was an eternal, infinite, and undefined primordial substance from which all the opposites, hot and cold, wet and dry, separated out to create the world we see. It was a staggering leap of abstract thought, moving from a physical element to a metaphysical principle. Then came Anaximenes, the third of our Milesian trio, who looked at his predecessor's ideas and decided to split the difference. He agreed with Thales that the fundamental substance should be something tangible. but he sided with Anaximander that it needed to be more neutral and all-encompassing, his candidate air. For Anaximenes, air was the perfect choice. It was everywhere, essential for life, and crucially, it could change its form through processes he could describe. When air is thinned out, it becomes fire. When it is condensed, it becomes wind, then clouds, then water, then earth, and finally stone. He provided a mechanism, condensation and rarefaction, to explain how this single substance could produce the magnificent diversity of the world. Over in another part of the Greek world, a rather mystical and mathematical chap named Pythagoras had a completely different take. For him and his followers, the ultimate reality wasn't a physical substance at all. It was numbers. They saw that mathematical ratios and principles governed everything, from the harmonies in music, the length of a lyre string determines its note, to the movements of the planets. They believed that the universe was, at its core, a beautifully ordered system of numbers, and that to understand reality was to understand mathematics. This was a profound shift, suggesting that the stuff of the world might not be stuff at all, but the rational, invisible relationships between things. Now let's wade into one of the biggest philosophical brawls of the ancient world. On one side we have Heraclitus of Ephesus, a rather grumpy and enigmatic figure, often known as the Obscure. His central idea was that the universe is in a state of constant, perpetual flux. Everything is always changing. His most famous saying sums it up beautifully. You cannot step into the same river twice, because by the time you step in again, both you and the river have changed. For Heraclitus, the fundamental principle was not a stable substance, but this very process of change itself, which he likened to an ever-living fire. Reality wasn't a thing, but a dynamic, fiery process of becoming, held in balance by a cosmic tension of opposites he called the Logos. In the opposing corner, from the Italian colony of Elea, stood Parmenides, who presented a radical and mind-bending argument. He declared that, contrary to what Heraclitus and our own eyes tell us, change is logically impossible. It is an illusion. His reasoning went something like this. You can only think about and speak of what is. You cannot think about what is not, because there's nothing there to think about. Therefore, since any change would involve something coming from what is not, or going into what is not, change is unthinkable and thus impossible. For Parmenides, reality is one, an eternal, unmoving, unchanging, and perfect sphere. What we perceive as movement, birth, and death is just a trick played on us by our unreliable senses. This, as you can imagine, was a bit of a bombshell. Parmenides' student Zeno of Elea became his master's great defender, dreaming up a series of brilliant paradoxes to show the absurdity of believing in motion. His most famous one involves the swift-footed hero Achilles and a tortoise. The tortoise is given a head start in a race. Zeno argued that Achilles can never overtake it because, to do so, he must first reach the point where the tortoise started. By the time he gets there, the tortoise has moved on a little bit further. Achilles must then cover that new distance, but again, the tortoise will have crawled forward. This process repeats infinitely, meaning Achilles gets ever closer but never actually catches up. Zeno's point wasn't that the tortoise wins, but that our concept of motion is riddled with logical contradictions. Trying to reconcile these two extreme views, the all is flux of Heraclitus and the nothing ever changes of Parmenides, led to some wonderfully creative solutions. Empedocles proposed that reality was made of four eternal roots: earth, air, fire, and water. These substances themselves never change, which would please Parmenides. However, they are constantly mixed together and pulled apart by two cosmic forces: love, which unites, and strife, which divides, creating the changing world we see, which would satisfy Heraclitus. Anaxagoras took this further, suggesting that there are infinite tiny seeds of everything in everything, and that change is simply a matter of a divine mind, or nous, setting these seeds into motion and arranging them. So we arrive at the atomists, Leucippus and his more famous student Democritus. They offered perhaps the most enduring and scientifically prescient solution to the great debate. They agreed with Parmenides that true reality is made of something eternal and unchanging. But instead of one big, solid block, they proposed that reality consisted of an infinite number of tiny, indivisible and indestructible particles they called atoms, from the Greek atomos, meaning uncuttable. These atoms are constantly moving through an empty void, the what is not that Parmenides forbade. The atoms themselves are unchanging, but by colliding, combining and separating in the void, they create the illusion of change and the diversity of objects we perceive. It was a breathtakingly elegant theory that explained both permanence and change. Why should we, in our high-tech world of 2025, care about these ancient thinkers and their seemingly simplistic ideas about water, air and atoms? The answer is that they are not just historical curiosities, they are our intellectual ancestors. They were the ones who first established the tradition of looking for rational, naturalistic explanations for the world. They invented the very language of science and philosophy. When a physicist today smashes particles together in a collider, searching for the fundamental building blocks of the universe, they are walking in the footsteps of Democritus. They are still asking the pre-Socratic question, what is everything really made of? Furthermore, the grand questions they posed are still the questions that drive human inquiry. The debate between Heraclitus and Parmenides about the nature of change and permanence is alive and well. Does our identity persist through time, or are we, like Heraclitus's river, in a constant state of flux? Philosophers still grapple with this. Can we truly trust our senses, or is there a deeper mathematical or logical reality beneath the surface, as Pythagoras and Parmenides suggested? This question underpins vast swathes of both science and philosophy. They essentially drew the blueprint for Western thought. Ultimately, the enduring power of the Pre-Socratics lies in their revolutionary spirit. They taught humanity that the most powerful tool we possess is our ability to ask why, and to seek answers not in ancient dogmas or divine whims, but in reason, logic and evidence. They showed us that the universe is not a chaotic mystery to be feared, but a complex puzzle to be solved. Every time we challenge an assumption, seek a deeper explanation, or try to understand the world on its own terms, we are continuing the magnificent intellectual journey that these brilliant, bold, and endlessly curious Greeks began over 2,500 years ago. Their questions echo through time, reminding us that the quest for knowledge is itself one of life's most fundamental principles.